Okay, perfect. So first of all, I just want to thank you for that introduction and thank all of you for allowing me to talk today and hopefully to contribute something to this club and community. I think it's such a wonderful idea. And I wish I had something like that when I was going through this recruiting process, because I know it can be really challenging at times, even just navigating some of the challenges of being a student athlete. So as Hallie said, I'm going to be talking a little bit about my experience as a student athlete today. On my side, I just have a few little tidbits about me, most of which I think Hallie covered. So I started playing soccer when I was 5 years old. I've been playing competitively ever since. I attended OHS for 3 years, and I began focusing on the college recruiting process the summer prior to my sophomore year of high school. I verbally committed to Cornell 1 year later, so the summer prior to my junior year, and I'll be enrolled this fall in the College of Arts and Sciences. Before I delve into the remainder of my presentation, I want to emphasize that I'm going to be focusing primarily on my experience and that of my friends and family members whose stories I'm well acquainted with. So with that being said, what I'm going to talk about is not the only way to approach the college recruiting process, nor is it necessarily the best way. It's just things that worked for me and worked for my family members and friends. So I want to emphasize that in addition to noting that my background is in soccer, and I have family members and friends whose backgrounds are in hockey and basketball, and who've had similar experiences with regards to the aspects of the process I'm going to talk about today. But with that being said, there's probably going to be some bits of information that are more applicable to you and to your sport than others. And if you have questions regarding the applicability of certain things that I'm saying, it might be best to talk to coaches, teammates, other people involved in your sport specifically, because I am definitely not an expert in all sports. So my presentation is going to be divided into 3 sections. The first, I'm going to talk about the college recruiting process, emphasizing, as I said, my experience and things that worked well for me and information that was transferred to me through my coaches, club heads, and different coaches, college coaches, and club coaches that I've interacted with through this process. In the second part, I'm going to talk about balancing school and soccer, so this might be more widely applicable. I divided this section into 2 slides. The first is going to be about general advice, and the second is going to be more specific to resources that you have at OHS that were really beneficial to me through my process. And then lastly, as Hallie said, I'm going to have a question answer section. You can feel free throughout the presentation to put things in text chat if you have any comments or questions, and I will do my best to address them, but admittedly, it's definitely not my strength to talk and read my slides at the same time as looking at text chat. So if I do miss anything or fail to address any question that you might put in there, I'll come back to it during this time. In addition to, if you have any other questions or thoughts you think that I could answer, speak to you about anything that I talked about, or anything else that might be on your mind, you can feel free to ask that or to voice those concerns or questions during this time. So as I said, I'm going to begin by talking a little bit about the college recruiting process. This first slide is about compiling a top 10 list. When I say top 10 list, it's somewhere around there. It can be, 8 to 12. And the idea of compiling a top 10 list is it's great to be able to narrow your focus. So when you're doing things like contacting schools, as I'm going to talk about in my next slide, you have an idea of who you're going to contact. Because even if you want to contact every possible school, it's just not feasible in actuality. So it's nice to have an idea of what schools exactly you're targeting. With that being said, it does not mean that your top 10 list will not change as you get older and as your interests change and you're exposed to different schools. And it does not mean that you're only restricted to speaking to and considering schools on that list. It's just a nice place to start. When it comes to compiling a top 10 list, I think there's 3 primary categories that it's nice to consider: academics, athletics, and student life. Underneath each of these categories, I have a few bullet points concerning more specific questions that you might ask yourself or think about. Some of these are very similar to things you'd probably think about if you're applying regularly as a senior to universities, and some of them are more specific to athletes and student athletes looking to play in university. So first, when it comes to academics, you might want to consider the general academic profile of the school. So this could be things like rankings, how it is relative to other schools just generally. You also want to consider specific majors or programs. So whether that school has a major program that you're interested in or areas that you would like to pursue further and how they perhaps do or ranked in those areas. Also, as an athlete, you want to consider the expectations with regards to academics. Even if you're an athlete, even if you're recruited as an athlete, there's still academic standards you have to uphold and maintain, and you still have to apply and get into the school academically. So the two main metrics that schools look at when it comes to recruiting student athletes, focusing on the academic side, are standardized test scores. So those are your SAT, your ACT, and then your GPA, primarily unweighted. And so you want to make sure when you're considering these schools that you have scores, you have a GPA within the range that they would be considering. With that being said, if you're a sophomore or junior in high school, doesn't mean that you have to have the exact SAT score that you need, but you want to make sure that your expectations are reasonable, that you're considering schools whose academic profile you'd be able to fit as well. The second category is athletics. The first bullet point that I noted here is division. So there's lots of different ways you can participate in college sports. There's Division I, which is the most competitive. There's also Division II and III, and then a lot of schools also have competitive and recreational teams that don't require you to be recruited. With that being said, even Division I, II, and III, you don't have to be recruited. You can play as a walk-on, which I'll touch upon a little bit more later on. But that's something to consider as well when you're looking at schools, whether they have, say, Division I or Division II in your sport, if that's a specific goal that you have. The second bullet point I have here under athletics is conference rules and travel. And this is something that when I began the process, I didn't know about, I didn't really consider, but it actually became really important to me in making my decision to commit to Cornell. And so what I mean by conference rules and travel is, as you'll find when you get into this process, is different conferences and different sports have different rules and regulations concerning how many hours their athletes are able to spend training during the season and during the off season, and how those hours are to be distributed. For instance, in soccer, it would be field training and weights. And so for me, something that really attracted me to the Ivy League was that they had a lot more stringent rules and a lot more regulations when it came to how many hours their athletes were able to train and how much traveling they were able to do, which made me personally feel more comfortable committing there because I knew that there was going to be a lot more time allowed for academics in comparison to other leagues such as Pac-12, SEC, or Big Ten that I was looking at. So depending on how you want to balance your time, that could be something worth considering and looking into in your specific sport. The last thing that I noted under athletics is team culture. I think this can be a little bit difficult to get a feel for when you're just looking at a school online or going through a website. But ultimately, if you're going to be part of this team for 4 years, or if you redshirt 5 years, you want to get a feel for what the team is going to be like. And this might be something that you come back to as you start speaking to coaches and players in the team as you get further along in the college process. But you can also look at things like social media. A lot of teams have social media. What kind of things they're posting? What kind of messages are they spreading? And as you said, as you get further along, just asking the right kind of questions considering their values. Something that really attracted me to Cornell was the first time I spoke to the coach. He put a heavy emphasis upon the relationships between the girls and the way that we create community and a family both on and off the field and support each other both in academics as well in athletics and just in life in general. And that was something that I really valued and attracted me to the school. Not to say that other schools do not have that or do not place a similar emphasis, but I felt that was really highlighted in my conversations with Cornell, which is something that drew me to them. The last category is student life. A lot of these things are very similar to the things that you would consider if you were applying just without athletics, just regularly admissions. So location, if you know that you want to be somewhere urban in comparison to rural, that might be something to consider. Second bullet point I have is extracurriculars. So these could be things like clubs that you really want to participate in, as well as Greek life. In my experience, different schools and different sports have different regulations concerning Greek life. So if it's really important for you to be in a fraternity or sorority, that might be something to consider, because some schools, if you are an athlete, will not allow you to do that and others will. And the last thing I noted here is general feel, which similarly to team culture, I think can be really difficult to get a feel for when you're just looking online and looking through websites. But this might be something that you come back to as you get to go on tours and perhaps get a better experience with those schools, as you want that sort of intangible feeling of when you're there, I could actually see myself being in this place, and I could see myself really being happy here for 4 years. So before I move on, there's a couple of things I want to touch on with regards to these different categories and compiling a top 10 list. The first is when it comes to how you want to weigh these different categories, academics, athletics, and student life relative to each other, it's really up to you and your discretion and what you wanted in your experience. For instance, I have some teammates who went on and they really wanted to play Division I soccer. That was super important to them and they're super happy. But on the flip side, I've also had some teammates who were good enough to play Division I soccer and received offers from Division I schools, but made the decision to play Division II because they felt that playing at a lower division would allow them to have more time to dedicate towards school and their social life. And that was just a more balanced approach for them. So ultimately, it's just up to you, what you want out of your experience and how you feel about the process. The second thing that I want to note is I think it's important to look at all of these different aspects holistically rather than getting hung up on one category. So going back to my previous example, it's not always just about I want to play Division I or I want to go to a top 10 school, but really what is my entire experience going to look like? And actually, I said two things, but there's one more thing I will note. I wasn't planning on saying this, but just came into my mind. I think something else that is important as an athlete to consider is things happen all the time. We're seeing this right now in this current season with regards to coronavirus and a lot of athlete season being canceled. It also happens more often with injuries and different health situations that come up. Even though playing a sport might be something that draws you to a school, you want to consider whether you would be happy there and whether you'd want to be there if sports was not an option. It's a really sad and difficult thing to think about, but it does happen. You never want to put yourself in a situation where your sport's taken away for some reason and you can't play and you're miserable in the place that you're at. So that's why it's really important to consider academics and student life as well, and to make sure you're really considering the balance between these three categories. Hallie, I saw you have a question. My text chat is like behind my like thing and I can't move it. It's like behind the cameras. Maybe if let's see if I move it here.
If you can't look
Okay.
at it, no worries.
I think that's fine. How did I weigh academics? Okay, I can see it now. How did I weigh academics, athletics, and student life? For me, academics was the most important thing. I love soccer. I've been very passionate about it for a long time, but I've always known in my heart I don't want to play soccer past university. I would love the opportunity to have a group of girls who I'm close to and to be able to sort of see the fruition of all the work that I put in and really be able to play in university, but ultimately I want to be able to go into the workforce. I want to participate in academia, and that was the most important thing for me. So for me, when I was considering schools, I was really just looking at Ivy League, Vanderbilt, or Northwestern, and I had to get into one of those schools through athletics. I was just going to apply regularly through regular admissions. By no means, again, is that the only way to approach it or the best way. For me, that's just what I knew was going to make me happy and attract me to a school. So on this slide, I have a little bit of information about contacting schools and getting on schools' radar. The first bullet point is something that I really want to emphasize. You definitely want to check the NCAA website concerning the specific rules for your sport, your age, and your division, because there's all sort of different regulations when it comes to when you're allowed to phone a school, whether you're allowed to phone the coach, whether the coach is allowed to phone you, whether you're allowed to go on unofficial visits or official visits. That really just change depending on the division of the school, depending on your age, your year in high school, and depending on the sport that you're pursuing. So those are definitely things that you want to familiarize yourself with and make sure you understand throughout this process. And for that reason, I have chosen to not put too many details about phone calls, unofficial visits, and official visits on my slide, because whether you're allowed to do them, how they work is really dependent on these other factors. But I will say when it comes to phone calls and visits, the one thing I would advise you all to remember is that in the same way that schools are interviewing you in some sense and trying to figure out whether you're a good fit for their school, you're doing the same thing with them. So don't be afraid to ask questions. Don't be afraid to sound as though, you're uncertain. It's okay to be in that position. It's okay to tell a school, I'm not 100% sold. I'm talking to other schools. It's okay to ask them and put them on the spot to answer questions that you might have. It's not just about, you can have me, you like me, so I'm going. You want to make sure that you actually want to be there as well. So that interview process goes both ways. On this slide, I've included some more information about emailing, because for my experience, that was something I was able to do at any age group for any division of school that I was looking at. And I think it was probably the most important element of my process in terms of getting on colleges' radars. So if you have an upcoming event, say a college showcase or a college ID camp or any other recruiting event in your sport where colleges are present, you want to email the faculty members of your top 10 schools a week or two prior to your event. And you want to invite them to come watch you play, because this is ultimately how colleges, they go through their emails, they see what kids invite them, what players are interested, and then they comprise their schedule of how they're going to go across this event and see different people play. In your email, you want to include all of the assistant head coaches and the recipients. The reason for this is some head coaches are not actually the ones who read through the emails. So if you only email the head coach and the head coach is not the one who reads it, you might miss out on that opportunity. So if you go to a school's website, they normally list a bunch of coaches, a head coach, 2 or 3 assistant coaches, even sometimes a recruiting person or officer, and you want to include all of those people available to you on the website in your email to ensure that the right person is receiving your information. In your email, you also want to include a paragraph, 3 to 5 sentences or so about why you want to go to that school. It was a good idea to return to the categories in the previous slide, so academics, athletics, and student life, and hit each of those main categories. The important part here is you want to make sure that whatever you're saying is specific to that school. I've spoken to a lot of colleges in my experience. I had some colleges who worked at my club team, and they spoke a lot about players who would send a very general paragraph that they know they copy and pasted to every single school, and that was a major turnoff to those schools. So you really want to make sure that what you're saying is pertinent to that specific school and that specific program and expresses why you think you might be interested. So you might include things talking about the location, the environment of the school, the team, how they've done. You can reference previous games, previous tournaments. You might also talk about specific programs at the school, even classes if you go onto that website. You really want to use the school's website meaningfully and use the resources that you have to articulate just a little bit of something about why you'd want to go there to show that you're genuinely interested in. The third thing that you definitely want to include is your schedule at an event. Schools, from what I've heard, don't want to have to go look you up and find out where your team's playing, who you're playing, what field you're on. So you want to include as much information as possible. You want to list all of your games. You want to list your opponents. If you have opponents in your sport, you want to list your time, your field, location, all of that information so the schools can just look at it, put it in their list, and attend. The last 2 bullet points that I have on the slide are not, I would say, required things, but they're things that you might want to consider adding if you have the resources and you feel like it could be useful for you. The first is a highlight video. This is usually a 3 to 5 minute video showing some of your clips and highlights from your game and your sport. The reason I've typically been told to aim for 3 to 5 minutes is you don't want it to be too long that coaches are just not going to watch it, or too short that it's not able to sufficiently showcase what you can do. Another tip for highlight videos might be to include 1 or 2 or even a little bit more good plays right at the beginning, because in the same way when you post a general YouTube video, you want to entice people to keep watching, you want to entice coaches to want to continue to watch your video and watch you play. Because the reality is a lot of the top schools are getting a lot of emails from a lot of different players and people who are interested in, and so a highlight video can be a really great way just to set you apart and just to encourage them to actually come watch you play in person. The last thing I noted here is Scouting Zone profile. Scouting Zone is a website that my team specifically used. I think it works for a lot of different sports. There's also a lot of different programs that do a very similar thing. So that could be something to speak to your coaches about, your managers, your teammates, see if there's something that your club is using. So I know a lot of clubs use them. But for us, what our Scouting Zone profile included was essentially a link to a website that had our athletic resumes that included things like accomplishments, regional, state, and national selection programs, MVP trophies, things like that in our recent years, your SAT score or ACT score, I said SAT because I took SAT, but standardized tests, and your GPA, typically unweighted. So this goes back to your academic profile, which we talked about on the last slide. Schools like to know if you're in that range of kids that they're interested in. I don't talk too much about SAT or standardized test scores in this presentation, but I do want to note that if you've taken the SAT or the ACT, even if it's not your best score, it's a good idea to put it on your profile or to include it in your emails or talk about your coaches with it, because even if you plan to take it again, they don't need you to be exactly at the score that they need or to have a 15-15, the perfect score. They just need to know that you're within the range of the kids that you're looking for. So as soon as you take it, it's in your best interest to give them that information, because that allows them to really continue with that process. Have 5 sort of general tips concerning the recruiting process. The first is to be proactive. You really want to be proactive with your communication and reaching out to coaches. As I said, there are so many players in every sport and so many qualified players. So you really have to make an effort to make yourself set apart from the rest and to make yourself attractive and interesting to coaches. even during COVID-19, I have younger teammates at my club who told me they've been sending videos to their coaches, highlight videos of them practicing, highlight videos of their games, updating them on what they're doing, just constantly trying to stay in communication with those coaches, informing them of what they're doing. The second little note here I have is to take advantage of opportunities. One of my favorite stories is from one of my former teammates' moms. She was recruited to play soccer at Stanford. And the day she was recruited and offered a scholarship to play at the school, Stanford had come to watch one of her teammates play, not her. So Stanford was not interested in her. Stanford did not come for her. But on that day, she was the best player in the field, and she was the one that got that scholarship. So at the end of the day, this happens a lot. Colleges might not always be there to see you. They might be there to see one of your teammates. They might be there to see someone on the other team. They might just be waiting for your game to end and the next one to start. But at the end of the day, it doesn't matter. If those eyes are on you and you have those opportunities, you really just want to take advantage of them and just do the best that you can. The third point I have here is to be positive. Another one of my favorite stories is I think a lot of people experience kind of this pressure in this time where everyone's committing to schools. For me in soccer, that was, I would say, our sophomore year. Everyone was committing. All the players pretty much had schools they were going to, and there were a couple girls that did not. And one of those girls got into amazing programs in their junior year, even in the fall of their senior year. People were committing to Brown, to other Ivy Leagues, to great schools, both in academics and soccer for us. So you have to just be positive. Even if things are not working out right now, there's always opportunities in the future. Things are never done until they're done. The fourth point that I have here is listen to your heart and don't settle. I think that goes back to there being that period in a lot of sports where everyone's committing. I think a lot of people experience that pressure of, I have to commit to a school, whatever options I have to take them. But you don't have to settle. As my example with my teammates show, commitment opportunities can come up a lot later than you expect. There's also always the option of, if you're not getting into schools or recruited by schools that you really like, you can always apply to schools academically and play as a walk-on. And so what that means is, as a walk-on, you basically apply to the school just like everybody else. If you get in, you're enrolled, and you always have the opportunity to try out for a team. So if you try out and you're just as good or you're better than the recruited players, you can be on that team just like everyone else. There are several walk-on players on my current team at Cornell, and we're looking for more walk-on players this year. So that's always an opportunity. You really want to think about, where is the place that I'm going to be happy, not just what is available right now and this pressure that I'm feeling. The last point I have is very cliche, but I think it is really important to have fun. It can be very overwhelming and stressful process. I've been through it. I know that. And it can be really easy to allow that to detract from your passion for the sport, which is ultimately what should be fueling you to want to take that next step and continue with your sport. So it's really important at the end of the day to just remember that you love what you're doing, to try and find ways to just enjoy it. So as I said, my next section, I'm just going to talk a little bit about balancing school and soccer. So beginning with some general advice, I cannot emphasize this first one enough. Using a planner is an absolute lifesaver for me. I use my planner for absolutely everything. And something that worked really well for me is every Sunday I would set aside 20-30 minutes, and I would go through all of my assignments on Canvas, all of my games and practices on TeamSnap, which is an app that we would use, and I would write down everything for the next 1 or 2 weeks in advance and plan exactly when everything was due and how I would get it done each day. So this is sort of, I don't know if you can see, but like a picture. I would have a color for every class, and I would write down everything that I was going to do that day, including, even if it was just 3 physics problems today, 10 pages of history notes, just little chunks of each assignment every single day that I would check off as I would go. That would help me to envision and to feel comfortable knowing that I was going to get everything done, even with everything that I had going on, and to make sure that I was chipping away at the assignments that I had to get done. So that was a really great way for me to keep track of assignments, to work ahead if I had the opportunity, and to just make sure that I was getting everything done. The second point I have here is to work ahead if possible. I know that can be really challenging during the school year, especially when there's just a lot of things going on, which is why I said to utilize your summers and breaks meaningfully. This does not mean that all summer, all winter, spring break, you should be working and super stressed. Does not mean that at all. You definitely need a mental and physical break. But something that worked really well for me was just knowing, say, after winter break or Thanksgiving break, I have a major event where I'm going to be out of town for a week. And so thinking about how during those times where I had a little bit of downtime, I could say, do an hour of history notes every day, or this summer I've been trying to do math, even for just 45 minutes every other day, or Spanish, just a little bit so you can ease some of that academic pressure when you actually get into it, when things are really stressful and there's a lot going on. So just always thinking ahead and having that mindset of, I have time, what can I be doing to put myself in the best position moving forward? Next one I have is to ask questions as they come up. I think procrastination and allowing things to become difficult to go unanswered is a problem for everyone. It can have dire consequences for everyone, but particularly for athletes. You never want to put yourself in a situation where you're at an event or you have a game or a practice and you have no time to put towards school, but you have all of these assignments you have to get done. I had events where I was in Florida for 2 weeks right before finals, and I got off a plane Sunday night, and Monday morning I had a final. And so I really had to make sure that I'd done all my studying and I knew what I was doing before that, because I didn't really have time during those 2 weeks to crash course all 5 of my classes and make sure that I understood everything. So it's really important that as things come up that you don't understand, you get those questions answered. So you don't put yourself in those situations where, as an athlete, you have so many things going on. And as a student, you have these academic responsibilities you have to also uphold. You don't have to feel bad about requesting extensions if you legitimately need them. In my experience at OHS, my teachers have always been extremely gracious with forwarding me or extensions and allowing me to turn in assignments when it worked for me if I had legitimate things going on. When you're requesting an extension, you want to make sure to say specifically what date you would like it to be extended to and what time, showing that you looked into it. You want to say why you need the extension and how the extension is going to benefit you. So if I have this extra time, I feel like I can enhance my assignment in X, Y, and Z ways, etc. The last point I've had here is probably the least glamorous, but that is sacrifice. The reality is, as a student athlete, you might have more responsibilities and more things on your plate and more responsibilities that you just have to uphold than the general person who's just focusing on school, or perhaps an athlete who doesn't go to as academically rigorous of school. And sometimes you just have to sacrifice some of those social elements or other things that you really want to do. Being a student athlete and upholding all these responsibilities might entail, for instance, if you're on a trip with your teammates, you might have to set your alarm for 6 and go down early in the lobby and lug all your books down there and study for 2 hours before everyone else gets up. Or you might have to say, hey, I can't go to the beach with everyone today because I have to stay at the hotel and I have to do a lab or something like that. You really have to make sure that as a student athlete, you're committed first and foremost to your responsibilities as a student and as an athlete. Sometimes that requires a little bit of sacrifice. On this slide, I have some specific advice sort of more pertinent to OHS students, just specifically about some of the resources that you have through the school. The first thing that I have here is to work with teachers to minimize the number of classes that you have to miss, even if it's an excused absence. So oftentimes when I would travel or I'd be on a plane during a class, that would count as excused absence, meaning that I wouldn't lose participation points and it wouldn't count toward the number of absences that it was allowed in a year. But I never really liked to miss classes, particularly in English and philosophy, because I felt like I gained a lot by being able to share my ideas with others in a way that I couldn't really replace with a class recording. So it's a really good idea if you know that you're going to be missing a class a week or so ahead to talk with your teacher and see if you can be another one of their sections or even another teacher section that's talking about the same thing. If that's not possible, class recordings are always an option. Class recordings have been super helpful to me. The second I get off a plane, I'm in a hotel, I will watch the class, take notes, ask any questions to a teacher that I don't understand. You want to make sure that you're not just missing classes and just forgetting about it and not doing it, because that's when things become difficult. I also noted here office hours and peer tutors. These are probably things that you guys are generally familiar with. Office hours are a great opportunity to go and speak to your teachers. If there's anything you missed, anything that you're not sure about. Peer tutors are very similar. I was a peer tutor for honors chemistry, honors intermediate algebra, and AP biology for a few years. And I will say, generally, a lot of people do not come in. When I would go through the schedule on WC Online, a lot of tutors would have a lot of empty spaces of people not coming in. So there's a lot of people that you can go and talk to. These are typically kids who've done well in the class. Teachers have nominated to be able to share the information with others. So that's a really great resource to take advantage of, even if you're working ahead in the class, say, and the discussion session is behind where you are. That can be a really great resource because those students are ahead of you. They took the class in previous years. The last resource I've noted here are college counselors. This is a resource that honestly, I probably didn't use as much as I should have or as much as I could have, but I think would have been really useful. College counselors can be great for a variety of reasons. One could be going back to the top 10 list. If you have an idea of what kind of things you'd want from a school, college counselors can recommend schools that you might not know or might not have heard of that fit the profile that you're looking for. College counselors can also look through your grades, your test scores, and your GPA, and let you know whether they think you would be able to satisfy the academic requirements of the schools that you're looking at with regards to student athletes. It's also a great idea to familiarize yourself with your college counselors because they're going to be the ones that are going to be submitting your transcripts, your information prior to your application to get them pre-approved, and then they're going to be the ones writing your recommendation when it comes to actually submitting your college application. It's a great idea to use that resource. I think they're more so reserved for juniors, but I think sophomores and freshmen can make meetings for them as well, if I'm not mistaken. Okay, I think that pretty much concludes what I have prepared by way of presentation, but if anyone has any questions or any just thoughts, anything that you feel like I could speak to, I'd be more than happy to do that.
Awesome. Thank you so much, Michaela. I really appreciate it. And I know, at least personally, I learned a lot from that. So thank you. Yeah, so if anybody has any questions, they can type them out in chat or just raise their hand, which I think if you just go to participants, there should be a button to raise your hand. Okay. Okay, so we have one person with the raised hand. Go ahead.
Yeah, so did you play for a brick and mortar high school or did you play for only a club?
Yeah, that's a great question. So I never played high school soccer. My freshman year, I did not attend OHS, but the league that I was playing for actually prevented us from playing any sort of high school sport of any kind. We were only allowed to play club soccer at this specific league. In the last 3 years being at OHS, I haven't had the opportunity to play high school soccer. So no, I only played club soccer, and that was in no way a hindrance to me with regards to getting recruited or any aspect of the process.
Okay, thanks.
I know I had a question as well as far as like the highlight videos. I know personally, um, going to or wanting to play my sport in college is relatively new to me, or I just kind of figured out that it's something that I wanted to do. So I didn't have that much game footage, especially from last year, and I was going to do it this year, but obviously that got kind of in the way. So I guess if you do have some footage, but it only, like takes up like a minute or two for your highlights and stuff, should you still send that or should you wait some time and try to get those like 3 to 5 minutes like you're talking about?
I think the goal is typically 3 to 5 minutes, but if you don't have 3 to 5 minutes, I think it's probably totally fine to send it if you feel like it shows your skills. Another thing, I'm not sure if this is exactly right, you might want to check in people, but I think it would be fine to also include some practice footage or just things of you doing skills, because as I said, this is something I never did. We had people filming our games from the time I was like 10, so I had lots and lots of footage. It's just the way our team worked. I was very blessed in that way. But I know there are younger kids at our club now who are sending videos to their coaches of them playing out in their backyard just by themselves or with a sibling and just demonstrating their skills. Look, I'm shooting. Look, I'm doing these dribbling. Look at me juggling. Look at me doing these different things. And so that might be a way as well if you wanted to add some of that, if you felt like a skill wasn't maybe being sufficiently showcased. And then as you get new clips, you can always change your video. You can always add to it. You're not stuck to a video. But I think generally if you have clips, in my experience and what I've been told, highlight videos are just a great way to get coaches to want to come see you play.
Cool, thank you. I also had another question. As far as I know, at least for rugby, there are some weird rules for like NCAA where I can't email a lot of schools yet, but I can call them. So I guess would there be like any information that you would tweak, like talking to the coaches on like say like a phone call, since it's not quite as formulaic as like an email, kind of going through like the bullet points that you kind of talked about before? Would you like make it more conversational, or would you kind of just like go straight into like all those things that like almost you would include in an email, I guess?
Yeah, that's interesting. I'm not familiar with all the sports, so that's totally different than what we had. I think like even for soccer, we were allowed to phone a coach at any time, and if we phoned them, they could pick up. I never personally did that. I always had my coach arrange meetings for me, which is very there's always ways around the rules. It's very bad. But anyway, I would say try and make it conversational. I think that you want to show your personality and be like a person that they want to have at their school and that they like, but also make sure that you're hitting your point. So something that I did always on my calls was I would have things written down on a piece of paper, questions that I had, things I wanted to say. I never read it like a bullet point, but I had in my head, these are the things that I'm going to hit. And so that could be a way to approach that, specifically what you want to say, maybe expressing when you call them, why you're calling, you're interested in the school, you can talk about specific things. And I think questions are just a really great way to begin that conversation. And if you're asking specific questions, that can also be a way to show that you've done your research. If you're asking things about specific programs, asking things about aspects of their school that show that you've done a bit of reading, a bit of looking, that could be maybe a good way to show interest as well. One thing I'll add to that, this isn't directly related to your question, but being a good person is really important. It sounds weird that how colleges would know that, but we had a college from Santa Clara who worked as a recruiter, and he worked actually at my club team as well. And he used to speak to us about going to events and being in the elevator where all of the girls would be staying at these hotels, and he would not be wearing his Santa Clara shirt. So he would just look like an average guy. No one would know he's from Santa Clara. And he would hear girls that he was recruiting talking to their parents. And he would write people off and cross them immediately off their list if they were disrespectful to their parents. So it sounds really strange to be like, I'm at a hotel, I'm with my teammates, but I've heard so many stories of coaches not liking players because of what they heard them say when they didn't know they were around, how they were behaving at restaurants, if they were being really rowdy and disrespectful, the way they heard them speaking to their coaches. So all of these different aspects go into recruiting. It's not just about how you portray yourself when you think that people are looking, but just how you are as a person in general as well.
Awesome, thank you. I guess I kind of have a lot of questions, but if anybody has questions, again, feel free to write them in chat or raise your hand. As far as finding opportunities to play outside of, say, like your club team or something, because as far as I've seen, that's pretty important to just get as much playing time as possible. Were there any ways that you specifically like found out about those opportunities? Was it like self-research of just finding out like different teams and different opportunities, or did you get in touch with different coaches and stuff like that? Like, how was that experience for you, I guess?
So for me, for soccer, we had these things called college showcases where all the top teams would go and play, and colleges, basically all colleges would go. So basically made for college recruiting. So that was a big help in soccer. Soccer is probably one of the more developed sports when it comes to these type of events. Something that also worked really well for me and as well for my cousins who were really involved in hockey and friends who are involved in other sports are college ID camps. And so ID camps is basically what they are, is colleges or multiple colleges hold an event where players go out and they hold like a camp. So it's usually, some of them are one day, some of them you stay overnight on campus, and it's 2 or 3 days, and essentially allows the coaches to work directly with you. They can speak to you at the camp, you wear a number, they take notes, it can really help them to see you and to get you on their radar. And then from there, colleges will sometimes go watch you play after they've already seen you. So college ID camps are super helpful. It's actually I committed to Cornell at a college ID camp. It was one of the number one ways that I got to get to know the coaches. I was the most time I ever spent with them was at a 3-day ID camp. And so most schools have those in the summer. You can typically, probably the best way to find them is going on their website. There's also certain ones if you don't want to travel to as many. I only went to Cornell's ID camp. I didn't go to a lot, but I have teammates who've gone to, like I think Pac-12 sometimes holds an ID camp, or sometimes there'll be ID camps where there's 10, 20 schools all there. So those can be good ones to go to as well if you're interested in a lot of different schools. You just want general exposure. It's like hitting one camp and getting exposure to all those coaches. But I would say college ID camps. I'm not sure if every single sport has them, but I think most do from what I know.
Cool. I guess, okay, another question. As far as, I know you haven't, you're not on campus yet or anything like that, but as far as you can tell, what do you think college life is like as a student athlete? Do you think there's like a pretty big difference from high school as far as, like, of course it's a lot more serious and probably more competitive, but how do you think, I guess, student life is as a student athlete in college?
I will say I think it depends largely on the school. I toured a few different schools and there was very different resources for athletes, say at Vanderbilt in comparison to Cornell. So that could also be something you want to consider, just in terms of tutoring that they offer, in terms of places to study, in terms of food, extra opportunities they offer to athletes. Different schools have different programs. Specifically at Cornell, I've talked to a lot of the girls in the team. I have a lot of questions. I'm emailing them like every day, different things. I think the general idea, or what I sort of can take from it, is I think it's perhaps more regulated. You have more trainings, more games than you might have had in high school, depending on your sport. But then I think there's more travel, so you could be traveling every other week, which is probably more than a lot of people are traveling now. But it's also different in the sense that your season is shorter. At least for me, as a current or former athlete of club, we played all year. We had about 2 weeks off, and we rest of the time we were playing. We had games all the time, every single weekend, and so we didn't have that off season. But with that being said, my answer is all over the place. I'm sorry. I think it can be more difficult in some ways, but as I said, you have resources that help you. Most teams will have tutors that accompany you on your trips. So people that will help you with your homework, people that administer your tests. Some places have special free tutoring offered to all athletes. Some places have places that you can go that are like libraries reserved just for athletes that have like whiteboards and computers and printers and everything you could need. And so there are a lot of resources available to help you with that.
Awesome. That's really helpful to know. Mark, do you have a question?
Yeah, so thank you, Michaela, for the talk. That's super cool. So you're talking about staying in contact with coaches from different colleges, so they don't forget about you. But if you're following up with emails, how do you phrase it or kind of construct it in a way that it might, so that you don't turn them off? Because if you are sending them something, maybe like the same message for every game or every meet, um, would that have any possible negative detriments, or is it all just positive? No.
Yeah, I think that's an interesting question. I will say, even when I was committed to Cornell, I still sent them my schedule. I didn't send the why I'm interested because they knew why I was interested, but I still sent my schedule in the same way. I think you wouldn't want to send a different email for every game or every meet. If it's like one event, send one email. And I think you can perhaps, I mean, when we say these bullet points, it's not as though like you're a robot and you have to write in this exact way. You can be conversational. You can say, hey, I just wanted to follow up from you based on our talk. You can also add more details to why you want to go to that school, saying, I'm really drawn to this. Whatever, as you talk to schools, you'll find new ways to communicate with them. So when I emailed schools, they would come watch me play. If a school liked me, they'd contact my club coach. This was all because of the rules at my age group. Then my club coach would contact me. We'd set up a time to talk. I'd call them. They'd pick up. Maybe I'd get their number. I would start texting them. You develop different modes of communication once you get on their radar. So I think emailing, you follow pretty like formulaic, generally like way of doing it until you get on their radar. Then usually once you get on their radar, you transfer into different modes of communication that become available to you depending on each group. So I'm not sure that exactly answered your question, but so if you have any follow-up, I can address that. That's probably the way I would think of it.
No, that sounds good. Thank you.
I guess so, like, due to different opportunities that you would try to utilize in different games and just teams and stuff, just kind of due to travel and sometimes price, would you ever have to prioritize certain opportunities over others, even just like time-wise? And I guess if you did have to prioritize some over the other, was there any like kind of rationale behind that, or was it a little less planned, I guess?
Oh yeah, definitely. I did not go to every single event possible. I think for me, as I said, academics are like everything to me. I love school. School is like the most important thing in my life. So I did miss events sometimes. As I think I talked about having to go to event 2 weeks in Florida before finals. That was the most stressful experience of my life. So the following year, like I chose not to attend that event because it was just too difficult with school. And I felt like upholding my grades and putting my studying first in that moment was more important than my sport and having that recruiting opportunity. So that can be something to consider. Being a student athlete involves both being a student and being an athlete. So you want to think about how you're mitigating those. Other things to consider, money for sure. Something that I did was so all the schools I was looking at basically were on the East Coast. I live in California currently. if anyone doesn't know that. So I did not want to stay in California. And so for me, getting to the East Coast is really not easy. And so we traveled in the summer rather than the winter because of snow and planes and things like that. And I tried to hit as many schools as I could. So I went to Philadelphia to tour Penn. We rented a car. We drove to Cornell. We hit other schools on the way down, and then we flew back. So trying to maybe think of things like that could be helpful. So trying to in one trip, if you could hit a few different schools in the same area. Also college ID camps, those are normally $100, $200 to register depending on the camp. So if you're thinking about, if I want to go to camp, can I go to camp where there's multiple schools that I'm interested in that are running it? That could be a good way, so you don't have to go to so many. And then thinking about really trying to maximize the schools that you really are interested in. So if you're kind of interested in a school, but not really, maybe that's not the one that you choose to go tour or you choose to go do things with. There's also official visits when it comes to touring. I never went an official visit. I committed before I was legally allowed to. So for us, September 1st of your junior year and forward, schools are allowed to pay for you to come see their school. So that's an official visit. It means that it's paid for by the school. So if you wait until you're allowed to have an official visit to commit to a school, that can also be a great way in terms of money. I have a lot of teammates at Cornell who went on official visits. They got to stay with the girls in their dorms, which was a great way to get to know team culture, to get to know the players. They got to go to classes with them and actually experience what it would be like to be a student athlete. And that was completely paid for by the school. So there are opportunities like that when it comes to money as well.
Awesome. That's really helpful just to hear. And anybody that has their hand raised, like, go ahead. So I don't know if that was from before or if you have a new question. Okay, cool. I'm just gonna let it sit for just like 1 minute if anybody kind of wants to think about any questions that they have. I know I'm just trying to think of all the questions I may have because I know I have a lot. I'm just trying to think of all the ones that kind of come into my mind in the past weeks.
I'll just jump in quickly too. If no one can think of them or something comes up at a later point, you can email me. I had my email on the slide, but they're not coming up. My email is my name, so Michaela, Michaela, Ferrario, at sbcglobal.net. So if anyone wants to email me anytime, you can. My Skype is one of those like weird number letter combinations that I don't know how to change, so I don't know how to give you that. But if you look up my name, it should come up. Or if you look at Bulletin, I'm still in Bulletin. So you can feel free to Skype message me as well, because I know that sometimes questions come up later, and I'd be more than happy to answer them or to call with anyone or anything like that. So feel free to contact me in either of those ways if things come up at a later point.
When you were looking at colleges, when you were kind of balancing, figuring out, you know, like the academics and the athletics and the student life, I know this is kind of more general to, you know, just going to a college, like regardless of athletics and stuff, but was it ever hard to kind of get a feel of student life and kind of the environment there? Or once you visited, was that like a little bit easier? Things like that, I guess.
I think it was definitely easier once I visited. I was looking at Penn and Cornell were two schools I was considering who are very different. Penn is in Philadelphia. It's a bustling city. There's like a highway that goes to the middle of the residential area. Cornell is like with the cows and the hills. If you drive like 10 minutes off campus, you have no service. If you go in the direction of the woods, very different. And I toured them within like a couple of days of each other. So for me, being there in Philadelphia is like, wow, this is so overwhelming. I cannot see myself there. I would be scared. I would have no sense of direction. I would be walking on the wrong streets. Like, this is not for me. Then I got to Cornell and I really loved the nature. I really could see myself going hiking, going kayaking when it's not snowing. I loved sort of the environment of people just feeling more down to earth. And I think there's just that sort of intangible. Another thing that you can do as well is speaking to people in your area who've gone to the school. There's a lot of alumni services that you can speak to even your coaches about who you're speaking to. They can put you in touch with alumni in your area or alumni from your sport or other girls or boys. I say girls a lot, sorry, because I'm used to my sport, but people on the sport or on the team who can talk to you and give you a little bit more of an idea of what it's like. It can be difficult though, but I think generally when you're on campus and you start using those resources, you can just get a feel and kind of sense, could I see myself there and being a part of that?
Cool, thank you. Yeah, I think that'll definitely be really helpful to kind of get a vibe of just like the campus and stuff like that. Oh, actually, sorry, I have so many questions. I know you mentioned the scouting zone profile, and I can do more research, you know, like after the talk and stuff. But generally, how is that set up? Is it mostly for like the academic side for uh, colleges and stuff to kind of see where you are in that front, or is it pretty much like an all-encompassing kind of student athlete kind of
Our
profile?
profile had everything. It was a really great resource. And our team set it up. So I don't know how easy it is for individuals. That's why I said I would talk to your team managers, team like your clubs. Those are people who set it up in our experience. But for us, it had a lot of different things. It had your team, had your picture. Pictures are important. It helps them see you. It had our GPA, our standardized test scores, what high school we were going to. It had we could list all of our athletic accomplishments. So we would talk about youth national team programs, state programs, different things you're part of. They can all be there. So it's a really great resource for schools. I think you can even there's a place to put a link to your highlight video. It's like a really just great profile of who you are. And as I said, Scouting Zone is one that we use. I think there's a lot of programs to do basically the same thing. I never really did research. We basically just given it by our team. They sent us a code and we did it. But I think there's a lot of different ones that do the same thing. If you're interested in using it, I think it is helpful. And I think a lot of teams use some variation of that.
Awesome. Yeah, that's helpful. I think I'll definitely look into that afterwards. We're just at about an hour now. So again, if anybody has any questions, just put them in chat and we'll try to get to them. But just to kind of close, thank you so much, Michaela, for speaking. I think this was really helpful and it was really nice to see kind of an inside of what the recruitment process is like and just choosing and how to get there in the process. It's really helpful for me and I'm sure for everyone else as well. So a big thank you for coming today and speaking and taking the time to do this. Next week, everyone, next Sunday at 2:00 Eastern time, we'll have Coach Annie Toto, who's going to be talking about player coachability, because I think that's a really big impact and a really big factor in how coaches see their players is how coachable they are. So she'll be talking on that, as well as jobs in athletics. Because she's the executive director of sportsometry, which you can look up, it's really cool. And she'll be discussing how to interview for those jobs and what it's like working in athletics when you're not necessarily an athlete, or, you know, you're past your athletic prime or whatever, you know, like you've stopped playing in college or something like that. So cool. Yeah, we're right at about an hour. So I'm going to end the recording about now, but thank you so much, Michaela, and everyone for coming, and I'll see you guys next week.